these prices are going to stay high for some time. And as Europe seeks to find alternative sources of energies, there is a mad scramble. Cost of those new supplies is also going to be higher than it would otherwise be.
Welcome back to Breakout with Breaking Views. I'm Peter Fell-Lawson, the global editor of Breaking Views in London's Canary Wharf, and I'm joined by Hugo Dixon, who is beaming in from West London. Our topic this week is Europe's energy crisis. As we all know, Europe's facing a severe squeeze this winter because Russian President Vladimir Putin has turned off one pipeline to Europe. But Hugo, you've been looking at this from a different angle. You've been looking at the longer term consequences for Europe. So what did you find out?
This is not a one winter problem. Markets are increasingly looking at where a price is going to be next winter and beyond, and they are going to be very much the same level. This is gas prices as they are at the moment, seven times higher than it was before. And another way of looking at this is what is the economic hit to Europe's consumers. And if you assume that the prices are indeed in line with the future prices, and Goldman Sachs has done the maths on that, and they say it's going to be a 1.3 trillion euro hit to Europe next year compared to last year. And so that's you're talking about high single digits percentages of GDP. So we're talking about something now. And the other thing is that these prices are going to stay high for some time. And as Europe seeks to find alternative sources of energy, some of which will be gas and some of which will be renewables and some of which will be other things, there is a mad scramble. And so the cost of those new supplies is also going to be higher than it would otherwise be, even renewables, for example, because, I mean, Europe is, in my view, absolutely rightly making a dash into wind and solar power and all of the infrastructure that you're going to need for that. But this happens at the same time, I mean, that on its own would put prices up, but this happens at the same time that China is also making a big dash into renewables, partly because it doesn't want to get, find its energy security is compromised in the years to come. And then we saw just a few weeks ago that the American Congress finally passed Biden's climate bill. It's called an Inflation Reduction Act, but it's actually more of a climate bill, which again has incentives for renewables. But also on the gas side, Europe is going to be paying higher for longer for gas. And this is going to have long-term, it's going to cascade down the years, the impact of this.
So because in the short term, at least, and maybe even for the next, not for this winter and possibly even for next winter, I mean, governments are talking about helping people out, right? I mean, the UK government last week talked about capping people's bills for consumers' bills for 2 years, something people think could cost £150 billion. So there's going to be a delayed impact, isn't there?
Yes, because the governments in Europe, in my view, have not done nearly enough to restrain demand for gas. And the problem is because the supply has been relatively fixed. If you keep subsidizing people so that they can maintain more or less the usage that they've had in the past, you just get prices ricocheting upwards. And so that is indeed, and then if you then seek to support that through the public exchequer, then you are loading on debt. And if this was again just a one winter problem, big gulp, over with. But now everyone's talking about 2 years, but I think it's going to be longer than 2 years, because at the end of 2 years, if the prices are still high, how popular is it going to be for a government to immediately see those prices jacked up, the consumer prices jacked up again? I mean, it's not going to be. So there's going to be a lot of tension. And I just want to give you a historical parallel here, because energy crises in the past tend to have big long tail effects. I mean, think of the Suez Canal crisis, when the Americans pulled the rug from underneath the Brits, the French and the Israelis, and they aborted that invasion. Then Europe decided, a lot of Europe decided it would turn to the Soviet Union, first for its oil and then for its gas. And we know where that's landed us. Or if you look at the Yom Kippur War in 1973, that resulted in OPEC pushing up oil prices to much, much higher levels. And throughout the 1970s, we had inflation. We only got rid of that with extremely nasty recessions in the 1980s, the early 1980s on both sides of the Atlantic. So this is, I mean, it has form. Big energy crises have form for not just being, you know, a short-term shock that you get out of the system. It drags on, and it also drags on because of the way that it impacts the economic side, impacts on the political side.
Particularly for companies that use a lot of energy. I mean, if the price of energy has gone up 6-7 times and is going to stay there, then presumably lots of industries and companies just become unviable.
Yes, I mean, quite a lot of heavy industry in continental Europe have been said that, you know, the business model doesn't stack up. It doesn't stack up. If their governments want them to keep investing in Europe, they're going to have to come up with some long-term solution. But it's very difficult to see what that long-term solution is. I mean, you can devalue the currency, and that helps with the, you know, industry in general, but it doesn't help with your steel, it doesn't help with your petrochemicals, it doesn't help with your paper and all of those things. And if you then want to support those, how are you going to do that? I mean, one possibility, of course, is protectionism. And you can put tariffs on imports, and you can try and justify that by saying we're going green. But at this time of great geopolitical tension, and we've got to remember, Europe has had a huge competitive knock. America has had a huge competitive boost because it's a massive supplier of shale gas and oil, and now it has a ready market, sort of a captive market for Europe, whereas it's basically dislodged Russia. China is a bit more mixed. But if you look at this in the round, if Europe wants to protect its industry with tariffs, it's going to have to impose tariffs not just on Chinese goods, but on American goods. And at a time of all this geopolitical tension, when the West is supposedly hanging together, I just think it's geopolitically almost impossible to do that. So I think that the industrial side, the heavy industry, the regular industry, you know, and they'll find a way of adapting. But the heavy industry, I think it's going to be a big deindustrialization of Europe.
More industry moving back to the US because the energy costs are cheaper. Hugo, fascinating as always. Lots of things to chew on and think about there. Thank you very much, and talk to you next time.